This is Extracted with your hosts, George Nguyen and Alex Thymmons.
Hi there. Welcome back to the show.
All
This is
right,
our,
welcome back. Great to see you, George.
Great to see you too. And we have a special guest today. Part of our kind of series on including more diverse voices, and also valuable everyday American voices, right? I know mainstream media tends to spend a lot of time on covering the quote unquote experts, who are often buried in books or in policies that have led us to where we are today, right? Part of the series is including other experts who are not covered by mainstream media, and who can give us a possibly more unique perspective, right, on what's going on. And so I'm super happy that our first guest is a very dear friend, and someone I've had the honor to work with, Dr. Trudy Ecoffey, and her leadership in wildlife restoration is is undoubted. The impact that she's created is beyond. I think the word meaningful is definitely not sufficient, because what she's done and continue to do is not just restore habitats, but more importantly, um, bringing social justice, particularly to disadvantaged communities, um, and particularly among Native Americans. Without further ado, I'd love for Trudy to introduce herself, and then we can get started.
Great. Thank you, George. Thank you for those really kind words. It's been my honor and my privilege to be working in this space for as many years as I've been able to. My name is, as you said, Dr. Trudy Ecoffey. I reside on the Pine Ridge Reservation in Southwest South Dakota. I am not a Native American, but I've lived in this community for 30 some years. I've raised my Native children here in their homelands, and primarily my work in the past has been, yeah, wildlife, buffalo or bison ecology restoration and land restoration. My background's in range ecology and wildlife, and I did most of my master's and PhD work on bison restoration. So it's kind of a new space here for me in terms of the whole AI world and this, because I come from background from when I first started my academic career, it's changed dramatically. Now, I'm not only doing contracting consulting work on for Tonka Fund and other nonprofits, but I'm also teaching again as associate professor at Chadron State College. So yeah, this world has definitely changed. I taught years ago at the tribal college, Oglala Lakota College, 20 plus years ago, and now we're in a totally new space. So thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. One of the big things, that we want to jump into, is looking your background in wildlife ecology. What have you noticed? One of the big things that's powering this AI boom that we're all experiencing are the build out of these data centers. Right now, there's a lot of emphasis on the data centers near population hubs like Norfolk, Virginia, out in Phoenix and these different areas. But what isn't really highlighted is the fact that there's at least 37 data center sites that are on or near native lands. And we, some of the data around the impact of these data centers are just abysmal. Um, what are your thoughts on these data centers being built out on and near native lands?
Well, George, that's a great question. I think the biggest thing is we're already looking at very fragile lands. Some of the grasslands here, particularly the northern Great Plains, we talk about the Amazon and protecting that, but we're not protecting our grasslands and our fragile landscapes. And now we have this new uh, thing with the data centers and as much energy and resources and things that it's going to bring in terms of environmental impact is phenomenal. A lot of our tribal nations are trying desperately to hold on to what little lands that they have and protect them as best that they can. And then when they get affronted by yet again another basing an assault on the resources, it keeps rippling. It's not unlike like we were fighting here in the Black Hills in South Dakota, uranium mining. Well, this is basically data mining, and it's going to cause an impact just as severe as some of the mining effects that have happened on not just for the tribal nations in South Dakota, but in the Southwest and all over the country, getting those resources. And so I'm guessing that, as in the past, many of your tribal communities are going to be fighting to have these data centers located near their homelands. And that'll be a fight that they're going to have to take on. Again, here on Pine Ridge in South Dakota and most of our reservations, we're already lacking in water. My partner spends his working career here working on getting water to rural communities through pipelines. And even then, it's just people needing spaces, places to live, places to raise their livestock or their animals, and the water is already scarce. So if you're going to get a data center that's going to be taking X amount of water resources and other things, how are you going to combat that when you've got people that are barely, third world country? I'm going to just say it here on many of our reservations. Due to the poverty and the lack of jobs and the lack of stability and social things that are illnesses that are happening and physical illnesses because of the historical trauma and historical things that have happened on native lands and to the native people. So now you're looking at this whole new avenue of AI and these data centers. What impact are they going to bring now? It's hard to say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really really interesting that you mentioned the water. I think that's um, some of the newer data centers data's coming out that they consume about 5 million gallons of water per day. So, can you talk a little bit more about the impact of the lack of water around the reservations and the impact that it's been having traditionally too on the reservation lands, right? So even with your experience working with the preservation of the buffalo and with basically the lands and the grass disappearing because of lack of water in the reservations, when you're talking about data centers being placed near a reservation and taking that very little water that is left, and how that's going to impact some of your efforts with the
Right.
preservation of the buffalo.
Yeah, the lack of water is already crucial in many of our reservations, particularly in the Great Plains and in the Southwest. Um, I won't speak to the Southwest as much, but I know that the tribes down there are trying to get their water rights. You talked about Phoenix and some of the reservations near there, already a lack of water, and then you bring in, to a desert environment where there's water resources are either deleted, polluted, or not able to get to the people or to the communities that need it. Here in the Great Plains, the same. I mean, we're draining out aquifers, like the Ogallala Aquifer, and down to the south of us, not only just for consumption, but to water monocultural plants, that are contributing to the groundwaters receding. And then here in South Dakota, where we don't have the best aquifers, we rely, solely on our surface waters, which could be, rivers and creeks and things like that. And we're seeing a real impact, to wildlife, and to corridors of where wildlife would be able to access water because they're drying up. Um, We get most of our water through several wells, large reservoir wells here on Pine Ridge and from the Missouri River. And now we're in a severe drought. Going into a severe drought. We haven't had any moisture this winter, hardly at all. And so that's not just impacting, the grasses and the land, but and the people. I mean, this takes years to recover from. When you're looking at a poor, poverty-stricken area as we are already, just getting your basic needs of water and being able to take care of maybe your livestock or your animals or your horses. It's a rich horse culture here, and not having water um, is critical. And then when you talk about these large amounts that would go into through the use of a data center, it's just mind blowing because then people aren't getting to their basic needs met. The crops and the animals aren't getting what they need, and so I'm not sure. I mean, it's just really a scary situation because these people here have fought so hard to get what little water rights and things that they have now. Because that's in the treaties, treaty rights for the Ogallala Nation here on Pine Ridge. That's in their treaties that the government needs to continue to make sure that there's health and water and food and things like that for sustainability. And it's getting kind of dire out there, a lot of situations. So, yeah.
You're seeing it firsthand, and your experience in measuring impact, over the past 30 something years, really, I mean, when you're telling me this is scary, I can only imagine how scary it is for the rest of the country. Um, and you're right, like the already water distressed areas are now being compounded by these huge data centers that are going through 17 billion gallons of water a year. Where are they going to get it from? And you're pointing out like it's from the rivers. All these blue waters is going to be used to power queries in San Francisco and in Washington, D.C., and dropping bombs on, kids in the Middle East. Um, I'm speechless. Uh,
It is speechless. I think as I've, grown over the years and researching and looking at the environment from the soils to the grasses to the wildlife and things like that, we're seeing a lack of a lot of, critical species that 30 years ago we didn't really think about, and now that's critical for them. I mean, there's great places out there that are still trying to save these areas. But if you need resources, you need funding, you need these, which has been cut as well, to be able to protect your rivers and your streams, which, the humans and all the relatives rely upon. And in the Lakota culture, you talk about all your relatives. That means everything. That means birds and insects and even the microbes in the soil. Those are your relatives. And so it's a ripple effect across it all. And um, even just the livelihood of some of the people that, a lot like ranching community here with buffalo and cattle and horses and even some it's impacting what little water we have already. It could be dire, and so I don't want to say like gloom and doom, but we're going to have to realize that at some point, that the tipping point is gone and we're not going to be able to recover. And it's going to be a loss of human life, if not a whole lot more. So really hope that the government and other folks start thinking about this, but I'm not sure if they will.
Yeah, and water is just one piece of it, right? So with a lot of these data centers, we're looking at some of the bigger ones that are being constructed. That projections go towards, they're going to need about 1/3 of the grid of the city that they're being constructed in with power requirements. So a lot of these reservations, they don't have their own power plants, right? So they're dependent on power and electric power coming from the grid. So when you have this additional power being required by a data center, a potential blackout caused by these data centers could lead to lack of power to some of the clinics and so forth, and the businesses that are in the reservation that could be directly affected by this.
Right. Yeah, sometimes you take power for granted. I mean, we are at the mercy of off-reservation resources because, yeah, we do not own, I'm not sure of any tribal nation that owns their power grid. I could be wrong, but for here, for sure. I mean, we've tried looking at, the tribes have looking at solar and wind and things that could possibly alleviate having to be on the grid, and it's been, there's just not the funding, the shortcomings, trying to make, better inefficiency houses so you don't need as much power. Um, so yeah, if there would be coming one anywhere close to this area, I don't think it could be sustainable at all because there's just not enough the way it is. And we, on Pine Ridge, we're looking at 2 million acres of land and roughly 35,000 people in that area. Yeah.
It seems like there's a compounding problem. This is a compounding problem, right? Because you look at the way these data centers are constructed, they're literally going in there and just paving it flat, destroying the local biosystem. And I mean, your work has, cited the profound impact of restoring the grasslands as a way to sequester carbon. This past week, the coasts um, in the U.S. have experienced this record heat waves, even in the center of the country, and we're expected to experience another heat wave coming through. And not just a heat wave. I think there's forecasts of a super El Nino cycle that's coming in. And the water along the California coast is already extremely warm. But this depletion of this grassland, our ability to sequester carbon into the ground, um, that's going to have this knock-on effect that's that's a tipping point you talked about, right? It's just going to have this knock-on effect that's going to be irreversible, and not just from an environmental standpoint, but from an ecological and human impact. That reminds me of like what happened during the Dust Bowl when humans did this, and people, millions of people were displaced, and I see that coming again.
I agree with you, George. We, my partner and I are out in the Badlands, here on Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and it was okay. It's March, and usually your average temperature in March here in South Dakota is probably right around 60, 50, 60 degrees. We were in the 80s yesterday, 80 degrees, and it was something that, and then later on in the evening, the wind is blowing. It does remind me. I had an aunt. She lived to 100 years old, and she died some years ago. But she lived through the Dust Bowl. She lived through the 1930s, and that was some to agree. Now people are agreeing that that was man-made. You took off. 60, 70 years earlier, you took off all these bison, killed them all, and then you bring in row crops, and um, this environment evolved with large grazing ungulates on the landscape, and yeah, it was up and down and tragic, times when there was a lot of too much, not enough water, things like that, things that were rolling around. But now humans are doing this. We're doing this to ourselves. Yeah, the carbon sequestration is huge because if you don't have the water and the grass in place, obviously you're not going to be sequestering that carbon. And I know that carbon credits has been, talked about on and off with reservation, and tribal councils and things like that. And most people are opposed to the buying of carbon credits because it feels like you're taking that, something good so you can offset it with something bad, and they don't care about the money. I don't think with tribal nations is ever really about the money. It's about protecting their land and their resources.
Yeah, no, wow, this is like really, really interesting. I want to take advantage of your background too. With, I mean, your PhD is in biology. You're teaching. You're a professor at the local community college, and you see this young generation of ecologists. And I shared with you before we started recording that I used to work on a hill, and I used to cover and talk a lot with a lot of the folks that are working in the ecology field, and how challenging it is in the current environment to develop the field. And I wanted to get your thoughts on our youth today, and on your students. Are we preparing them
Yeah,
to become this next generation of ecologists?
right.
Um,
I don't know. I'm talking with my colleagues. We're in the rangeland management program, so we're talking about preserving rangelands, and we have a wildlife and a livestock component to it. As, and so I see these young students, I think most of them want to do good. I mean, obviously they're in the ecology background, but how can we equip them with the tools to make, decisions, um, critical decisions about the environment? So, I mean, we brainstorm, and I've been to some new faculty training meetings where we're trying to say, okay, artificial insemination or artificial intelligence can be something that is useful to some degree, right? I mean, I've been using it for some of my prep classes, but then it's just generated, and you're not really thinking about what really needs for those people, these young people coming up in this world, what they really need in terms of land management, water management. A lot of these young people come from farms and ranches already, so they're very in tune with the environment already. But how can we give them the skills to use AI or other things, tools, but for them to actually make real life decisions about what's going to happen for their generation and beyond? Um, it's not necessarily about even cheating, to say I'm going to use AI to generate my paper. It's more about, even if you do use AI to help generate your paper, are you retaining those concepts? So that someday when you're working with a land manager or a tribal nation on their land management, do you have the resources or the skills, the know-how or the observation, I should say, to be able to help them protect or enhance or whatever their vision is for their landscape? So I think we're trying really hard in this world now, even with research, college research and things, is that thought-provoking idea of how and having these young people be able not to just pick up their phone or pick up their computer, but be able to observe and know what's going on in that environment and be in touch with it. Because there's nothing going to say like, okay, the grass looks good today. It doesn't look as good, it looks better than it did yesterday, or last year, or what I'm trying to say there. There's a connection that you have to visually, and no AI, no computer generated anything is going to tell you if that land is okay or right. You can use some of the tools. You could use satellite imagery. You can use, you know, mapping and all kinds of remote sensing. That's what I'm looking for, to help you gain that information. But it's nothing like the eyes that have been trained to understand what that landscape could or should or needs to be at.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna say, like, I mean, that's exactly it, right? It's we can have all the data, capture all the data we want, but in the end, these ecologists are frontline workers who are combating, uh, like restoring our biodiversity on the land and helping to sequester carbon. But if they are using these AI tools and not retaining the knowledge, right, in long-term knowledge, that becomes very dangerous because they don't know they won't be able to they don't have the core memories that helps them to react to the situation, right? That remote sensing doesn't really tell you like, okay, you should be doing this because that data came from a database that captured 100 years of past measurements, but it doesn't account for the human and the biological impact, right? Or the biosystem's impact on the land. And so it's great. These systems are great for looking backwards, but they're not great for moving forward, right? Especially in creative ways when certain variables are not accounted for in the previous models that these algorithms are trained on. Because let's be honest, these are all just algorithms, large language models. They're not truly autonomous, and their intelligence is just being able to package not previous knowledge, but not being able to forecast or not forecast, but foresee, right? What needs to be done in the future.
I totally agree with you. I was actually just working on some land management things for the Santee Sioux tribe in Nebraska, and I was looking at some artificially it was past. It was the past of plant production. And then so I was looking at how we got there. There, like you said, there's algorithms to show you that. Like based on what you see today, you can go back and basically remap or relook at that. But how does that help you go forward? So now the tribe is wanting to know how to do land management on this pristine, native, tall grass land that they purchased. I mean, it's priceless. It's in their home lands, and they want to do the best by it. They're not right now going to use buffalo to manage the grass. They're going to use fire and cattle, which is fine, and you can mimic the past because our rangelands evolved with obviously grazing, large grazing herds, and fire. And so we're trying to mimic that past for the future to make sure that we don't have invasive encroachment of red cedars. And so I guess my point is like, yeah, um, can you start thinking about what the past looked like and how it might influence the future? So again, trying to get young people in this ecological grassland and wildlife space to think about best practices. And unfortunately, we can't look at, large landscapes anymore as they were because we fenced or there's ownership issues. Even here on Pine Ridge, I mean, their tribe owns thousands of acres, but it's still fractionated and um so looking at large landscapes really hard, but you almost have to. And going back to the data centers, if they're going to be eating up all this resources, how are you gonna manage the lands outside of that? Because you're going to be lacking water, you're going to be lacking vital resources that you need for our food production, honestly, for food.
Yeah, what's interesting too is that, I mean, for many years we've had this issue of traditional conservation models failing to integrate a lot of the indigenous knowledge within those models, right? But at least you had humans in that pipeline that, right, we were talking to the tribes. But now with a lot of these jobs actually being replaced by AI because, well, we don't need a person to do this analysis. We can have an AI go ahead and do this analysis. And, them integrating, I mean, basically completely ignoring any sort of indigenous knowledge within these new models that the AIs are going to be putting forward. I think we're going to have even a deeper problem of failing to coordinate and making sure that we integrate indigenous knowledge into the conservation models.
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. I sat on a scholarly committee for some time about traditional ecological knowledge. I got off of it because I just had too many other things going on and didn't feel like I could do it justice. But across North America, there's a group of scholars that are talking about this ecological knowledge. Honestly, it's within the DNA of the people here, right? Why they're indigenous or native. I mean, it's not just about the DNA of a person, but the DNA of what you eat, right? And what you consume and what is around you, the water. And so that knowledge is there. Some of it has been lost or forgotten, but there's a real push right now to say, okay, things are changing now. What can we do with this knowledge that we've had for generations to combat it? What can our ancestors tell us? What can the land tell us? So I think there's a real, I don't know, 20 years ago, I never heard of Indigenous ecological knowledge. And the first article I read, I remember I'm like, wow, there you go. So I think there's a lot of people really, and I was really encouraged by some of the young Native people that I've worked with in the last few years that, some, from tribal college to, Ivy League universities, they've come back home. They've come back and they have started to think really critically, more so than what their parents or grandparents could that didn't have the opportunities they had. And they're bringing that knowledge and that from the Western world and mixing it and meshing it with from what they've learned from their elders or from, ceremony and these kind of things. So I'm really, really encouraged by that. So we can talk a lot of doom and gloom about some of the things that are happening, but these young people are so resilient. Um, and I'm just, yeah, I worked with, I don't know, and even my own children, all in college in different areas. And hopefully that they're going to come back, home and they're going to share that knowledge that they learned and gained. And I'm very thankful for those opportunities, for them to go out, but come back and bring, that space back, especially when they can mix it with their culture and their identity.
That's great to hear that we have a reverse brain drain, right? That we've seen in the past where the opportunities are taken away from indigenous lands, and so some of the brightest minds are forced to leave so that they can have that economic mobility, right? That aren't offered on indigenous lands and reservations. So that's great to hear, and this is perfect because it dives into like our next topic that we want to discuss is about that whole academic to work pipeline. And what are your observations? Where you're located, because what we're seeing, like across from, and we study these national reports, but it doesn't reflect the emotional impact and the psychological impact that actually happens, and and more importantly, the real impact, right? You can quote all these numbers like all day long, like 30% of 2005 graduates couldn't find a job, or they found a job within their field of study, and a third ended up being underemployed. Only and 25% end up working outside of their field of study, and that's got to be super demoralizing, right, for a lot of young people. Um, yeah, I love your take on this and what you're observing, while you're teaching. And yeah.
Right. Well, we
Yeah,
talk about that. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
especially, I was just going to add to that, especially with, right? So our kids, right? So they're graduating college and they're graduating college with a degree in ecology, for example. Can they find a job even in the field, or do they go, and they're forced to work at a local shop if they want to stay locally?
Yeah, I think that's a real concern, native or non-native in this field. Um, I think that's a real concern because, yeah, the tribe, we come back to the tribe, and the tribe only has X amount of dollars to hire these young people, ecologists, natural resources, wildlife biologists, and it's very, very limited, very, very limited because you're, federal grants or federal funding, Bureau of Indian Affairs funding. And so for them to come back, trying to find those jobs, like you said, underemployed or not employed at all. I see it all the time. I mean, if you become a nurse or you become a teacher, or those are there's jobs here for that, but there's not as much for, or hardly any for their natural resources. And here, like I said, we live on 2 million acres of land. And you think, and various, we have like 7 ecotypes just on Pine Ridge, right? From pine trees to grasslands to short grasses. Um, and we can't find the resources and funding, to to hire these great people, these great minds. I think most of Native people would come back regardless because this is their homelands, this is their family. I don't care if I'm underemployed as long as I have some kind of job. Or I'll be a science teacher at the local high school and we'll talk a lot of environmental stuff, which is great. Even for non tribal members, I'm thinking about a lot of the young people that I teach down in the small college in Nebraska. It's a state college, and most of these young people come from farm and ranches, but there's going to probably be no farm or ranch for them to go back to, or it's going to be limited. Or so we talk about job placement. Well, for the federal government, USDA, um, Forest Service, other federal jobs, yeah, might be out there. So we try to prepare them for that because they'll be working with, producers and tribes and things. But where will we put them? Obviously, they have a love for this. And they may not become rich, and that's not their whole point. But they're in this program because they want to take care of the environment. They want to take care of the animals, or so I think, in this realm of where of the ecology professionals, we're trying at State College at least, just trying to give them a good base so that they can go out and just have some real world experiences, not necessarily having to getting a master's or a PhD. We're just trying to have them get the basic knowledge of good land management, good husbandry, either cattle or bison or sheep or whatever it might be. And so I think giving them the tools, you know, um, is what we're going to have to do. And hopefully, once this administration um, we'll get back into a more environmental movement. If not, we're going to reap the consequences sooner than later.
And I've seen that on the Hill with basically how hard it was to work with the conservation programs to try to make sure that they get some sort of funding because funding was cut for a lot of them. And with funding being cut, then automatically there's no more jobs open for a lot of these recent graduates. So we have students that graduated this past year that basically they're just, past couple of years really, that are still looking for jobs in the conservation field because there's no funds for a lot of these programs. So very good point.
Yeah, there isn't, and I'm hoping that through a lot of nonprofit, working with World Wildlife Fund, the Nature Conservancy, and others, that's maybe where some of those jobs are going to be if they can continue to generate support, as nonprofits to be able to hire some of these folks. That's kind of my thought. Um, until the federal government starts opening. I mean, I have a friend that's a tribal liaison over on the Rosebud Reservation, just to the east of us. She's a tribal member. She's been a tribal liaison for USDA for many years. And she is, again, covering thousands and thousands of acres, and she's the only one in her office. Either they've taken the buyout or they're not hiring. And so I'm hoping that that avenue at some point will open up too, because again, it's about our food source. Honestly, USDA is about our food source, and either crops or livestock. And we're gonna, if we can't give like the producers and the people that are growing our food, we can't give them resources to help them with water development and pipelines and things and reseeding of native grasses or whatever it might be, then you're going to see a lot of people failing. Yeah.
It's crazy because I think about like all the broken promises and all the treaties that have been violated by the U.S. government, especially with Native people. I can't help but to think that maybe these this is planned failure, right? Cutting the funding is to ensure that these communities have to vacate the land uh, at their own will, right? So that it makes way for these data centers to be built. If you look at, like, why are they building it on this kind of land? Well, there's abundant sun for renewable energy. and there's abundant wind, right, for wind energy. And more importantly, our missile silos are all there. So, when you talk about like, AI and building these systems and making it more from a security standpoint, right? It's isolated, so you're not going to have, activists who are coming in and burning the data centers down. And two, you're not going to have, eco warriors who are going to, like lobby and do all this stuff because it's so isolated. Um, yeah, and so like you then also like build this kind of security perimeter around it, not just from a physical standpoint, but also from a cyber standpoint, right? Um, yeah, like I can't help but to think that this was planned so that the government can vacate the land to build these data centers so that we can continue to build out the war infrastructure that we have right now, right? And you look at like the Anthropic, they refuse to sign with the government, but their systems, the government systems still using it, and then you have Open AI who's like, yeah, like we'll sign whatever you want. Uh, and so I can only imagine that this will only accelerate the build out of these data centers. Right now, we have 37 that are like on the books that people know about, but I'm sure there's plenty more that is not being disclosed to U.S. citizens because of the national security risk around it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I technology is a great tool, right? It is, it definitely is. And coming from, um, early academics when I, I had to go to a space on campus to get a computer and going to get a interlibrary loan to be able to get some books shipped to me to the point where I can type anything in and it comes blanking out and so then I have to look at that what it's is like do we need all of that? Do we need it at our fingertips every second? Do we need because what's scary, like you said, the national security of it, the bioware or the warfare of it that it can be, it could destroy it. And then the next thing, we're not looking at our planet that's in critical danger um, of not being able to ever recover if we continue using this technology and making these data centers. It's a brand new world, but we may regret this. The creator gives us a tool, and then somehow man takes it to the nth degree and could destroy ourselves because of that.
Oh, I think we're already on that path. I mean, this is where there's so much that we could learn from a lot of the practices of the Native American tribes when it comes to ecological restoration, because it's going to be needed, because we have abused nature to such an extent and we continue to do it. And we are creating or we're leaving behind to our offspring an earth that is in trouble. And if we don't do something about it soon, it's going to take a lot of effort to come back from the destruction that we're going to be reaping.
I agree. Hopefully, like I said, some of these young people that are coming up in this world of ecology, native and non-native, or whatever background you come from, some really great, I have some really great students from other countries too that are, just as concerned about their home place. And I'm hoping that they will continue to push forward, and learn new ways and new thoughts to be able to protect the land. So that's what I'm kind of banking on, and because I'm surrounded by a lot of young people, that gives me encouragement. So hopefully they can recognize that maybe we're going in the wrong direction. I think it's going to take education, and definitely I was saying this at a conference that I spoke at, to mostly Native people, and talking about we've got to get the word out, the education. So I think your average person here does not know what destruction a data center could have, or what the implications of using all those resources to have something like that in place. So that's my take home, I guess, on that.
Yeah, this is I don't know. I feel like our podcast tends to veer towards the doom and gloom, but I love that you're seeing um the reverse migration, right, of talented Native youth who are going to Ivy Leagues and coming back and, doing away with this whole construct of what success means in the Western world of fancy cars, big houses, whatever, right? And saying like, no, actually, wealth is actually in the land and our people in our community. And there is an urgent need to restore what we had and to protect what we were holding on to. And hopefully through this kind of uh, the push for education in native knowledge, right, on building out biodiversity and resiliency can help create a cascade that pushes us in the opposite direction of what we're going right now, which is strip mining the planet so that a few rich people can get richer and shareholders can be happier, when we should be rethinking this and say, we are, as a civilization, the shareholders in all the resources on this planet. How do we take back that ownership? And I think it definitely begins with education. And it requires people to get out in the front line and start doing the work, right? And stop relying on these algorithms and large language models to tell you what to do, and go out there, learn from it. We're not saying like throw it out, right? But use it as a tool to help like triage or observe historical patterns, and then work with real people on how to create a real plan that actually can address these negative impacts and create a more positive outcome, right?
And I want to add to this too, George, because you got a good point there, and then I think it adds to the mutualist solutions, and I want to kind of bring a little bit of hope into our conversation. So mid of last month, there's this group, the Indigenous Climate Hub, and they put up a report that basically, because of the past couple of years, there hasn't been a lot of support for the ecological programs that impact directly the reservations. You have more and more reservations actually kind of starting to work together, and especially with their children, with their youth, to kind of bring these relational practices that are not common in traditional ecological frameworks, like talk about fasting and on-site teachings. And we're curious, have you seen that where you're at, Dr. Ecoffey, and like kind of, yeah,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think so. Some of these uh, coalitions like Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, that's they have their regional chapters and things like that. And I wasn't able to go to this area's last week in Sloan, Iowa, but I think they are working and looking at, they have these climate resilient discussions every session or every time they meet. And so that up in the Alaska Natives, are talking the same way, and bringing research, partnering with research folks, and sending young people to do the research. I work with the Center of Bison Excellence, South Dakota State University, and they're bringing in all kinds of researchers to really look at just, obviously bison or buffalo, in all aspects, like the wallows, the buffalo will wallow, and that was a natural thing that they do. And these wallows will contain, water for, migratory birds and insects and other small animals. And we don't have the wallows anymore because we don't have the buffalo everywhere anymore, unless you're in a buffalo pasture. So the point is, I think they're really looking at some of that, at least on the bison end of it. I can't speak for others, but I do listen, like, for the whales, for the whaling communities on the Pacific Northwest, talking about how how can they help them mitigate climate, the whales themselves, what can we do for passageways and things like that for these animals to be able to have a safe place? Same down in Florida with some of their animals and relocating and helping these animals. So I think there is some of that going on. It has been for a long time in Native communities. I think that's just going to ramp up more because the land, for an Indigenous person is more crucial than anything from any of us that have come from another country. It's not that we don't care, we just maybe don't have that DNA again I was talking about that comes from that place and that space.
Yeah, it definitely feels like like the Western, especially Western European, influence on our quote unquote democracy and our capitalist system, right? Of like it's since the 1700s, right, when they started kind of passing laws that are about ownership of natural resources and assets, right? That basically kind of removed a lot of, I think, Westerners' uh, understanding or appreciation of nature as a common resource, an asset for all humanity, where they've shifted from that to this is an asset that I can buy and trade and store wealth, personal wealth. I think that's is what is contributing to this whole mindset of like, let's just strip mine the planet and who cares what happens in 50 years because I can buy another yacht.
Yeah, I think we got to get out of that mindset, that Western culture that came in to say this is mine, only mine. I think most Native communities, to some degree, still have that openness of like, I do not own this. This is not mine. This is the people's, or this is, this is our lands together. Um, and getting away from that. I've seen a real reinsurgence in the last 30 years of that cultural aspect of going back to the the old ways where if your neighbor didn't have something, you would give them what you could. If you're, taking only what you need and not over harvesting, those kind of things. I think there's real been a reinsurgence, I think mainly with the language. I was talking with my friend this morning about some of the emergent schools that we have. It's amazing to hear these young people talking Lakota. It's little children. You never heard that. Used to only elders that remembered it from their grandparents. But with that language is also every word, like mini is water, you know, there's a lot of different words that have many in it because it talks not just because the water was the core source of it. And so and those kids know that. They know that, okay, the and so with that cultural resurgence, I think it's really empowered this environmental renewal. Though I still think there's still the disconnect for not Native children and with the environment. I spent my lifetime. I think the reason why I came to Pine Ridges was because I was doing projects in the school with environmental impact, water tests, things like that, looking at wildlife. And yeah, if we could recreate some of that, we need to, yeah. And then the old traditional ways of harvesting. We don't need to be going to the grocery store. We can harvest our own deer. We can harvest our own buffalo. We can go and search for, the roots and berries that our ancestors did or grow some. I think COVID really taught that a lot to the people on the reservations, particularly because many of them are isolated and we're not able to get goods that they normally do. I have to laugh even about chickens. A lot of people still have chickens here from COVID and they love to have them now and they get fresh eggs because we couldn't get eggs for a while. Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, I think this is beautiful. I mean, you couldn't have said it better. I mean, this having these resurgence of beliefs that, not everything is mine, but some of it, I mean, needs to be considered as ours, right? That communal property. And I think some of that knowledge, if that could be implemented into Western thought, especially at this stage where we're at the late stage capitalism, where this type of thought will be needed to survive. especially in those communities, and I'm talking here non-native, but we will have communities that will have 75% unemployment, or basically not even being able to find a job, right? So now, how do you survive, right? And if your neighbor, and if the neighbors don't stand together to create this communal relationship, then it's going to be hard to survive. And so there's a lot to be. So I loved what you just said about this resurgence of this type of thought within the Native communities. It's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think it will continue to grow. I mean, that's how tribal communities survived for millennium, right? Was to, band together, and if you could do this, I can do that, and we'll trade, or we'll, make sure that the whole it's not just about the individual or even the individual family. It's about, they call the Toish by A here, which is the extended family, which is extended and extended. And that goes for your, all your relatives, all right? All the birds, and the two-legged, the four-legged, and the winged ones are all part of that. And so that's been something great to see. And I think it'll continue to grow, especially when you get these other threats coming in. It seems like some of these data centers seem far from their minds, but they know, they're aware, and we have, access to outside information like everybody else, and we know, there's threats that are out there that we may not understand or see, but we need to be aware and we need to be prepared.
This is great. I think this is a great way to end the podcast, because it ends on a great note, right? And yeah, I will to like I think expand on this resurgency. Like, I think we're seeing that, like, not just in rural communities, right, but also in suburban communities and urban communities, where we're like saying, like, we're seeing it. We're like, you know what? My mom's house, in the suburbs, we have about, 4 or 5 neighbors who have their own chickens. And, everyone started planting more fruit trees in their yards. And now when you walk by and you see a beautiful fruit that's ripe, just knock on the door, your neighbor's door, and ask for it, and they'll give it to you. It's that kind of resurgency in building out and lifting communities, that we're seeing. That I think this is why, like, Alex and I were like, we're seeing this from a macro standpoint, that people are beginning to realize that all these years we've been told and propagandized to build up, higher fences and taller walls, when we should be actually like tearing them down and planting more trees, right? And building more bridges, so that we, when we fall on hard times, we can, tap on a neighbor's shoulder and receive the help and support that we need, right? And vice versa. Being sure that we are aware of what's happening in our community and providing support where we can, so that we can lift everyone up and not just focus on hoarding, for ourselves and our families.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I really appreciate you guys for inviting me to be part of this. I love the work and the message you guys are giving. So if I can be of further help or anything, let me know. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Doctor.
Yeah, thank you, and definitely thank you for getting George and I to behave. It's always
Oh no, do you guys sometimes not misbehave? Oh no.
we have to. This will make it easier for me to edit this now, because typically I have to go back and delete. So it's like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't have swore there. Maybe I should take that word out. So
Right, great.